Welcome to the Hollywood in Toto podcast. Entertainment news and reviews without the woke Hollywood narrative. Free speech, free expression. Now that's entertainment. And here's your host, award-winning film critic, Christian Toto.
This week on the Hollywood in Toto podcast, we explore why the press hates a movie shining a light on the very worst crimes against humanity possible. We talk to the creator of a wild new comic series involving a young Ben Franklin. You're going to want to check this out. And we talk with Jocelyn Chia, the stand-up comedian who is staring down the very worst attacks cancel culture had to offer. And of course, she lived to tell the tale. She has a great story. But before we begin, I'd love it if you subscribe to the Hollywood in Toto podcast so you won't miss a single episode. Or if you have a friend who loves movies, TV, and free speech, tell them all about it. I think they're going to dig what we have to share. Well, Sound of Freedom is the sleeper hit of the summer, no doubt, but it's still complicated. Yeah, the Angel Studios movie made $40 million in its first 6 days of release. Those are huge numbers for an indie film, that's for sure. It's a fact-based story of Tim Ballard and his quest to save kids from sex traffickers, and it clearly struck a nerve with movie audiences. Word of mouth is through the roof. The drama boasts a 99% fresh rating from general audiences, not critics, but just general audiences, at RottenTomatoes.com. Last time I checked, it was around 75-76% fresh from critics, too. Not too shabby. Except the press isn't taking the news well, and that's being kind. Rolling Stone, The Guardian, The Washington Post, where real news dies in darkness, they all savage the film. Well, why? Well, it stars an openly Christian actor. That's Jim Caviezel, remember The Passion of the Christ? It's that guy, who allegedly spouts conspiracy theories off-screen. You mean like Trump colluding with Russia to win the 2016 election? Oh no, Hollywood likes that conspiracy theory. Other conspiracy theories, allegedly. Others say Sound of Freedom is a QAnon-adjacent movie, or some such nonsense. Yeah, the film was finished 5 years ago. It probably went into production 6 or 7 years ago. You know these things take a very long time, and it's just hitting theaters now. It sounds like the perfect QAnon plan. Those wackos have all the patience in the world. Now, others fear it's overhyping child sex trafficking, as if it's not a real and shocking crime that's happening in all 50 states. Yeah, that's a stat that caught my eye. One of many, like this one. There are 27.6 million trafficked persons globally today, and about 20% of them are kids. They should make a movie about that. Well, they did, and the press is furious that they did. But I think the most shocking commentary, and this maybe won't be a surprise, about the film comes from CNN.
And The Sound of Freedom does focus on a real issue of sex trafficking. But that theme, it's sort of like that kernel of truth that feeds the QAnon conspiracy theory. Tell us how those two things work together.
Sure, and the most durable and the most believable conspiracy theories are not entirely false. There's something in them that is true and the rest of it is false, but the believers point to the one true thing and they say, oh, you don't believe that this particular thing is true. In terms of child trafficking, we know trafficking is real. We know it has real victims. No one is denying that. But these films are created out of moral panics. They're created out of bogus statistics. They're created out of fear. And with something like Sound of Freedom, it specifically is looking at QAnon concepts of these child trafficking rings that are run by the high-level elites, and only people like Tim Ballard and only people like Jim Caviezel, and by extension, only people like the ticket buyer can help bring these trafficking rings down. So there's a very participatory element. You're not just going to see a movie, you're just killing 2 hours on a hot day. You are helping bring down these pedophile rings and save children. Now, it's not true, but it's a very comforting and it's a very warm feeling to have.
All right, let's recap. An indie movie comes along shining a terrible light on a chronic crime spree at a time where theaters are struggling to get back their cultural prominence. The movie's very existence sparks awareness of a vital issue, so much so that real change could happen. You know, if enough people hear about it, enough people think about it, they're talking about it, maybe something will actually be done. More of it. I'm sure there are people helping out now trying to crack this problem, but obviously they're not doing nearly enough. It's just so widespread across the globe. And the media, the press, the Fourth Estate, are absolutely furious at the people who made this movie possible, throwing every slur and specious argument they could find against them, and far less so about the real-world traffickers who are ruining the innocence of countless kids. Does that sum it up? Yeah, it does. You know, no matter how much you hate our corrupt press, it's not enough. Picture this, a young Ben Franklin traveling through time to save the country he helped found. Got your interest? It did for me. That's Silence Dogood. It's a new graphic novel from award-winning illustrator and writer Sean Salter and writer Charles Naff. It's the untold story of America's most prolific founding father and his fight with a tyrannical AI software program plotting to enslave all of humanity. Now, the story is part of an Indiegogo campaign. It's going to be 13 issues that spread across 4 full-color graphic novels. I recently spoke with Sean about the project, where this crazy idea came from, and so much more. Here's your chance to learn all about Silence Dogood. Sean, thanks for joining the show. Now, I love the premise of your comic series. Tell me the origin story. How did this come about? Because there's a lot of moving parts here. It's so interesting, but sometimes there's a spark, a moment that kicks off a project like this. But was it like that, or was it a collection of ideas that all coalesced?
I think it was a collection of ideas that all coalesced. I've always been I love American history. I've always been really passionate about American history, but I've also always loved science fiction. And I don't know, just one of these days, one day it hit me like, what if, like when you're a kid, you have all these like, what if this happened? And as an adult, I still do that. So it was like, what if Benjamin Franklin, this amazing, like our most prolific founding father, was a time traveler? What would that look like? And what would he say if he traveled through time to our future, or a future similar to ours? What would he think? And so that's kind of the question that started it all.
Mm-hmm. And I think a lot of people conjure some of that when they think about, okay, the Constitution, it's an older document. It spoke in amazing ways to modern times, but it certainly couldn't predict where we'd be today, the technology, things like that. So I think just from the get-go, that's an interesting idea. Then you add the, different times elements here and the different ways that the future is unfolding. But obviously when you're doing a story like this, you do want to, if not comment or provoke a conversation about what's happening in our culture today. Is that fair to say? And what are some takeaways you think readers will get from the story?
I mean, ultimately, no. I really want to just tell a really great story. Mm-hmm. I think that it naturally does happen because the direction that I've ended up going, I started this process 10 years ago, and we were talking about robots and technology and, what that future is going to look like. And then 5 years ago, I started to introduce, what if AI was in control of the future? And now we're here today where AI is like on the verge of becoming something really big. So it's kind of merging to that. However, ultimately, I just want to tell something that a really, really great story, but also maybe a little bit of a glimpse into what the founders would think if they saw a world that was the way that we're kind of going.
Yeah. Now, obviously, there's been a push in recent years for conservatives to make their own Hollywood-style products. It could be comic books, it could be the Daily Wire, you name it. And you mentioned off air that sometimes some of those projects can be a bit dry. How do you address that issue with Silence Dogood?
We're not lecturing. So there's not any conversations towards the audience about, this is what happened during this time period. This is what they were thinking. Instead, we're just going to tell that story. One of the story early on American history stories that Ben Franklin, a young Ben Franklin, so he's about 18, 19 years old in this series. One of the stories that he finds himself in is the crossing of the Delaware by George Washington. But we're not going to approach it like a lecture or a historical lesson. We're going to approach it like an epic, amazing story that it was. We're just going to tell that story. We're going to tell it in a little bit different way. We're going to take some creative license because obviously there's going to be time traveling happening. But I think that that's really the failure of a lot of conservative creative content, is that it gets really, really lectury really, really fast, and
Gotcha.
it gets boring.
Yeah, obviously. And it's, even if it's well-meaning, that may be the result. You know, it's funny. I dreamed of being a comic book artist when I was a younger person. I have 3 arts degrees. I have never used in any official capacity. And thankfully, the student loans are paid off at this point. But I'm kind of curious about how you started as an illustrator, and at what moment did you realize that, hey, this isn't just me scribbling on a pad. I could actually make a living at it. I could get hired. I could do this professionally.
I think always. I mean, I don't remember a time where I wasn't drawing.
Okay.
I started life drawing. I remember, I mean, that was the most fun I would have in my playtime would be drawing.
Mm-hmm.
And I was always creating characters. I was like in 3rd grade, I was designing my own toys by like drawing characters and cutting them out, making action figures out of them. 4th grade, I started making my own comic books. The only reason why I've taken this long to do my own comic book is because I mistakenly made the mistake of going into creative advertising in the entertainment industry,
Mm-hmm.
and going down that rabbit hole and kind of being locked into the corporate world of advertising. And now I'm like, what have I done? I need to go back to my childhood. I need to go back to who I am. So that's like, this is my escape from corporate entertainment America into something that I really, really can love again.
And you know, a lot of people on the right have bemoaned the state of comics in general, saying they're too preachy, they're too left of center, they are excluding people on the right, Heartland USA, if you will. Have you experienced anything like that in your work, or maybe even people you've worked with?
Yeah, my entire career, born and raised in Los Angeles.
Just your entire career, that's all.
Yeah, my entire career. I was born and raised in Los Angeles, and I've always been pretty conservative, pretty libertarian conservative type guy. When I was younger, I was a little bit more conservative, almost Alex P. Keaton like. Got a little bit more libertarian as I got older. But I've always been the odd guy out living in LA, being that way. Looking at how everyone to me was just certainly mad, and it wasn't ever working. But constantly having to hide my beliefs, not talk about my beliefs, not go there when it gets, talked about, and then literally, getting, having shows canceled because I'm that I had sold over to a major studio because of my white cisgender Christian conservative leanings.
Well, that's a lot of slurs to put in one sentence. Well, break that down a little bit more. How did that happen? How did you know that was the reason? I just share some more details there, because I've heard similar stories. I've talked to Tyler Fisher, who's a straight white male comedian who's suing right now his former representatives about this issue. But what was it like for you? If you can get more specific, that'd be helpful.
Well, it was we had sold a show over to one of the major studios, and we had a major executive producer attached to that show, someone who had 4 successful shows produced. Mm-hmm. However, this was a new era, and it was 2016, and Trump had just got elected, and they were not really wanting to deal with us, and you could tell that. Very early on, they were trying to interject their left-wing policy into our kids' cartoon. Mm-hmm. We were trying to just tell a really, really good story, and they really wanted to use it as a vessel to kind of like push an agenda. And there was a little tension there in the beginning, but we were being very, very cautious and kind of playing along just so that we could get the show on the air and then do what we wanted to do. And then Trump got elected, and it's like pretty quickly after that, we got the phone call that it was like, yeah, we're going to shelve this for right now. And then when I did some digging around with some of my, contacts and friends that worked at the studio, it had come to discover that there was an unwritten HR policy that they weren't hiring any more straight white men for executive level positioning, that they were discouraging any kind of content that would be produced by straight white men, and that they were really leaning heavily into DEI, and that was on the forefront of their agenda for everything that they were doing. So just not necessarily that they called you up and said, hey, you're three white guys that seem conservative, and two of you guys go to the same church, so we're going to cancel your show. It wasn't anything like that, but it was like 2 + 2 = 4, and
Yeah.
there you go.
And I think this was, in a way, this was ahead of the curve where it wasn't discussed at all. And I think even now, I think we're starting to hear it out in the open where companies are saying it out loud, what was maybe whispered at a couple of years ago. So I think the culture is changing dramatically in a way. They may have even said that to you if this had happened, yesterday instead of 4 or 5 years ago. Now obviously what that does to you is it forces you out of the mainstream. It makes you go the Indiegogo route, which we'll talk about the way to find your project in a minute. But you're not the only one. You're not the only creator who's gone in this direction and had success. The Rippaverse, it seems like it's just doing great things on its own without the Marvels and the DC comics of the world. And Ethan Van Sciver obviously had a great success with his brand and his artwork. What do you think the secrets to success are in this space? What's, if you could advise, even if you're just giving advice you've learned recently or things you'd like to share with fellow creators who maybe are similarly blocked from the system, how do you go forward?
Well, I mean, I don't know what yet because I'm still kind of learning myself. I know, like Eric July and Ethan Van Sciver, those guys were successful before they started doing the indie route, and that definitely is a help. And so, if there's people out there that already have a track record and are thinking about it, most likely you're going to be able to do it because people like the content you're making. They like the content you're making, and they don't care who you're doing it under.
Sure.
They just want more of it.
Yeah.
I think. For someone like me who is not necessarily known because I've always been the guy behind the guy behind the guy, what the heck do I have to lose? Why not? Why not try? I'm passionate about it. I love this story. I think it's really, really good. Everyone that's read it so far is like really excited. And I believe in it. And so why not?
I love that attitude. And by the way, it reminds me a little bit of Tim Pool, who's obviously a huge podcaster, innovator, YouTube professional. And when he started making music, it was a bestseller because people liked Tim Pool and they would follow him in different avenues he pursued. And so he had that name. But I do think that consumers are both hungry for new content, fresh content, and they're willing to take a chance. And I think that's been one of the great things about crowdfunding. We've seen it across the board. It could be movies and TV shows or even comic books. It's a great path moving forward. Last question: when you think about your project, Silence Do Good, is there a particular subplot, a theme, a part of the story that really was entertaining for you to be part of that creative process? Where this element of the story was just, man, I could tell this story forever. It just really it got me firing all my creative cylinders.
Oh man, there's so many. I mean, I think that answer is hard because it's a few things. For me, one is telling American history in a really fun, engaging way instead of it being a lecture and this date on 1776, this happened. It's like, no, it's like exciting and things are happening. And so that's what I'm excited about. But I'm also really we're in Silence Do Good, we go a little dark and we do explore the moral conundrums that are going to come up with dealing with robots doing the work for us, and artificial intelligence, and what a virtual world potentially could look like, juxtaposed to man's true calling in their life.
Yeah,
and I don't think man is meant to sit in a pod and consume garbage, and just be this. I don't know what it is, what they're trying to do to us, but put us in a pod and just have us look at screens and eat garbage food. Man is destined to do something better, even if it's just getting outside and putting a seed in the ground and watch and making sure you can grow food. There's something greater for every individual to do, and this book explores what that is and what happens when we don't step out of that and seek that out.
Yeah. I mean, I think there's something so human about communing with nature, and that as we get more technologically baked and as it were, that we still need to go out, to go on a hike, to touch the grass, to meet people, to meet friends. And hopefully that drive will be there no matter what the technological advances are. But Sean, thank you so much for sharing more about Silence Dogood. Now, you can support this comic series by going to indiegogo.com. Just punch in Silence Dogood in the search engine. It'll pop up there. And I can't wait to check this out. It sounds like a lot of fun, and I think your enthusiasm for it sells itself. So, Sean, thank you so much. And I appreciate the fact that you're living the artist dream. And again, you mentioned off air you didn't go to school, so I'm a little bitter about that. But otherwise, I am fully on board.
Nobody should go to school. It's a waste of time.
It's money. Funny. I actually had an art professor back in the day said, if you draw every day, you don't need me. You don't need the school. We all gave him a good chuckle, but I think he was right, because I think you're proving it with everything you do. But thanks so much, Sean, and good luck with Silence Dogood.
Thanks, Christian.
Jocelyn Chia was canceled for a joke, and it's even worse than you think. The Singapore-American comic riffed on the cultural differences between neighboring Singapore and Malaysia during a stand-up routine that went viral. That bit also darkly referenced the 2014 Malaysian airliner that went missing without a trace. It's a tragedy, no doubt, but, sometimes you can joke about dark things. And that was enough to get her canceled in more ways than one. Her social media accounts were hacked and attacked relentlessly. The mob drowned the comedy club in question where she performed with 1-star reviews, which is brutal. You can absolutely crush a business that way. Another New York comedy club said, no, we don't want you to work here anymore. It's just not worth it. IBM canceled her long-standing gig with the company, and then the Malaysian police reportedly called for her arrest. This is for a comedy routine, folks, for a comedy routine. Now, Jocelyn could have went on the apology tour and groveled for forgiveness, vowing to be an ally toward whatever cause is going to be acceptable in this situation. Nope. Dug in her heels, started to laugh about the matter, and slowly people started gravitating to her side, including Chrissy Mayer. And if you don't know Chrissy Mayer, she's a very funny person, and she is a freedom-friendly comedian, so she's always a friend of this show. Well, Jocelyn shared her story with me recently, with how she segued from the law, she was a practicing attorney, to stand-up, and why she was actually thinking of giving up comedy before the cancel culture assault happened. She's smart, she's resilient, and most of all, of course, she's very funny. Meet Jocelyn Chia, the comic who couldn't be canceled, but not for lack of trying. Jocelyn, thanks for joining the show. I'm always curious how comedians get their start. It's such a unique and fascinating career, obviously, but you were a lawyer before you became a comedian. Yes. Can you talk a little bit about that transition? I can't help but be curious about it. And when you realized that was the right call to make, because it clearly was.
Oh, thanks. Well, I think it remains to be seen, but I was a lawyer for just 3 years. I did corporate work, mergers and acquisitions, private equity, and capital markets. And then I was invited on, and I was also a consultant after that. And when I was working as a consultant, I was invited to see Aziz Ansari by this guy. And halfway through, I started crying. I was like, why am I crying at a comedy show? And my inner voice was like, well, this is what I really want to do.
Wow.
And and it happened a second time. I was like, why do I keep crying at comedy shows? And then the inner voice said the same thing. So I was like, all right, let's try it for a year. And 10 years later, I'm still here.
That's amazing. I'm sure the comedians love when the audience is crying, but still it led to something positive. Now, is it something that when you look back at it, you think, gosh, it was always within me? Or I mean, I think your body was almost telling you that this was what you were meant to be. But when you look back in retrospect, did you sense that was within you all the time?
Yes, it must have been, because I would always crack people up unintentionally. I would say something and people would laugh, and I'll ask, why are you laughing? Because it wasn't funny. And they would just say, the common response was always, it was the way you said it. Mm-hmm. And I think it was Ellen DeGeneres who said once that a comic says funny things, a comedian says things funny. So I was in the say things funny category naturally. And of course, once you write funny, then you also say funny things.
So you were halfway there. You had the technique down. It's just a matter of
halfway there. Yeah. Said things funny.
Now, obviously, words matter as a lawyer, and they matter in comedy. Clearly, I mean, just the right inflection. You add a word or two, you take a word or two away. All of a sudden, the joke is much, much better. Did your legal background help you in any way as a comedian, or are they so different that they're just two distinct skill sets and you were able to do both?
Yeah, I really wish it could have been more helpful. For me personally, it doesn't. I mean, I have read that at a really sophisticated level of comedy, what you are doing is presenting the audience with a thesis, usually a pretty outrageous one, and then giving them the argument for why you're right.
Mhm.
And certain comics can do that brilliantly, but I'm not there yet. I cannot. I'm not so good a comedian that I can say something outrageous like rape is okay, and then I give an argument, a comedic argument for why I am right. So hats off to the ones who can do it. So no, I mean maybe at some point in my career I can get there, but I haven't found it to be very helpful. In fact, oftentimes I do wonder, I'm so smart. How come I can't write a joke to save my life? I mean, obviously I can every now and then, but the writing process has been quite a struggle for me in getting jokes to really work. It takes a while to get a joke to work quite often.
I've been watching your videos, and one of the things that struck me was you're great. I think they call it crowd work when you're interacting with the crowd. Yeah, did that come naturally, or has that something that's maybe almost like a muscle you've built it over time?
No, it didn't come naturally at all. For 6 years, I avoided crowd work because I just thought I was not a crowd work comic. Yeah, I just didn't dare to. I would just hide behind my material and never did crowd work. And finally, after about 6 years in, I was now at a lot of the clubs, and I was getting very tired of my material because at the clubs, when they're paying you, I always felt obliged to kill. So I would barely work on new material when I was at the clubs. So I was getting sick and tired of my material. I was I'm just going to do crowd work because I'm just so bored of it. I just can't do these jokes anymore. And so once I started, soon I realized, oh, I can actually do this. And it's not all the time that something funny comes out of crowd work. But yeah, I definitely noticed that I do have much more of a talent for crowd work than I thought I was. I definitely didn't think I could do it in the beginning.
Gotcha. Obviously in the beginning, I talked about what you went through and the cancellation attempts against you for the work you were doing, that one viral video. Did you ever feel fear for your safety during this whole process, or has it been a different component that the attacks come from?
It wasn't until people kept telling me to be safe. I'm like, it's not up to me, guys. Like all these people like, oh, be safe, stay safe. I'm like, well, tell them to tell them to keep me safe. I can't do anything about it. So I wasn't until everyone else started fearing for my safety, and I was like, shut up. I mean, what are they going to do? Fly from Malaysia to come and hunt me down? Not that there aren't Malaysians here, but I would like to think that the Malaysians in America, especially in New York, would like understand more of an American style of comedy, right? So, and they'd be more, I think, more reasonable. I think a lot of the blowback is from Malaysians in Malaysia who don't know comedy. I mean, they have one, maybe two comedy clubs in all of Malaysia. And the second one is very new. So the first one, there's only like one like long-standing comedy club in Malaysia, in the capital. So there's a lot of rural parts of Malaysia where they've never even seen a comedy show. So whereas any of it is a Malaysian in America, I think they would have at least some kind of understanding that this is just a joke. And in fact, I did have a Malaysian come to my show recently, and she was like, yeah, I'm a supporter. I was like, really? So there are definitely some Malaysians who are not against me. But the physical aspect, so I wasn't really, people around me were, which kind of affected my psyche a little bit more. But the thing is, I live in New York City, and things have been getting pretty risky for a New Yorker with a lot of anti-Asian hate, but also just general post-pandemic aggressiveness amongst a lot of the homeless people. So I already live with a heightened level of threat. So I don't really feel like this adds that much more threat to my life on a day-to-day basis being a New Yorker. I mean, I certainly wouldn't travel to Malaysia. I mean, there's also the aspect of being a target. So am I a target now? I guess there is that too. But I don't feel it in New York City. If I were to travel to another country, I may worry about it a little bit longer. But by the time I get around to traveling to anywhere in Asia, hopefully things have died down by then. That it's not a big deal. But then someone said, people bear grudges for a long time. So I would say, yeah, okay, maybe some slight concern at times when people are like, stay safe. I'm like, stop telling me to stay safe. It's not up to me.
That's right. They do mean well, but it isn't. But there's a little put of fear in your...
But it's like, yeah, it's just a...
Now, you mentioned that the Malaysian culture, that they're not steeped in the comedy tradition, and that's part of what happened here. But what certainly what's happening stateside is there are a lot of people who will shut down a comedian not because of that reason, because they don't want that joke to be told for some reason. It could be offensive, it could be outrageous, it could be a number of reasons. Did you find that element as well with your attacks, where it wasn't just Malaysians who were offended, it was people in the U.S. who didn't like the joke? I mean, was that a component as well?
Definitely no one in the US, which makes sense. I mean, I've been doing this joke for over a year in the US with no complaints. But Singaporeans were surprisingly upset. And when I tell that to my American friends, they're like, why is Singapore upset? I'm like, I don't really know either. But apparently the Singaporeans were really upset. And I think my guess is they are like being the white people of Asia. You know how when white people get offended on behalf of black people when you tell a joke about black people? So I think Singaporeans are just getting offended on behalf of Malaysia because now they're being so woke.
Right. That's interesting. That's a very American tendency. So that's for sure.
Right.
You know, if we understand, some of the clubs that you were working at were, a lot of 1-star reviews, and I think the club in question pulled down the video. And on a certain level, I get it. They're a business; they don't want to go out of business. They've got to keep their customer base happy, and they can't. Those kind of reviews could be really problematic. But at the same time, I'm thinking, gosh, why couldn't they stand up for you? Why couldn't they stand tall? What were you frustrated by that experience? Is there a different way that maybe they could have, saved the business and stood by you? Because, as a comedian, you think they'd have your back first and foremost.
Yeah, I mean, they had my back in the sense that I could still work at the club, right? They still gave me the clip, but without the comedy club logo. So they didn't make me take down the clip. I could post the clip I wanted to with their comedy club logo was behind, was in the backing, right? So you could still see us as the Comedy Cellar. They just didn't have the logo on it. But of course, I wish they had kept the clip up as like a big, like, no, this is an artistic freedom of expression. It's just a joke, like, enough about the woke culture. But of course, it's a business decision. I mean, which business is gonna? Their rating went from 4.7 to 2.8 overnight. So that was pretty nuts. Like, as a business person, of course, you'd be pretty upset by that. I mean, I do wish there was a way. I mean, and they did end up getting it reinstated, so all end up being fine. But I think in the moment where they didn't know it could be reinstated, right? So I think hindsight is 2020. If they had known that Google could reinstate their rating, then they would have probably had more comfort in standing by a comics bit, because this club is pretty known for standing behind comedians. I mean, they were the ones that let Louis C.K. work again after he got Me Too and stood by him and getting him stage time. So this club is quite known for being pretty pro comics. So I think the next time they get review bombed, they will know that they don't have to take the video down, because now they know that Google can likely reinstate them. So I guess for the next time I piss off another country, they might be able to keep it up.
Gotcha. In the past, I've spoken to Chrissy Mayer, and she had your back in a big way during this whole situation. Did you find other comics come out to support you, either publicly or privately?
Mostly privately. So I did see, and I wasn't active on Twitter because I wasn't active on Twitter before Malaysia Gate. And I took it down because I was like, well, let's have one less repository of hate for them that I don't even use, right? I don't really use my Twitter. I don't really use my Facebook account for my comedy page. So I had deactivated it. So I didn't know that there were a handful. I mean, there weren't a lot, right? There was just a handful of comedians who have been like tweeting their support. So I would say the public support. But once I started getting on Twitter and being active, because apparently that's where all the cool cancel kids are, the people who are more into freedom of speech, right? So once the New York Post had published an article about how, Jocelyn Chia, a U.S. comedian, refuses to apologize for a joke, and their readers are, yeah, good for her, la la la. So now the more conservative followers were following me, so they have been defending me because they are very much very pro First Amendment rights. I mean, no American has been like, you shouldn't do this joke, but the ones who are like really vocally supporting me, I notice tend to be more conservative than political leanings. I mean, the liberals are also supportive, but in different ways. It's kind of cute. Like the liberals are like, oh, you have like my emotional support. And the conservatives are like, you're protected by the First Amendment right, and I'll use my Second Amendment right to protect you. Like that level of support. I'm like, wow, I'm loving it.
I haven't seen your whole stage act before. I'm hoping you come to Denver in the near future, but I've been watching a lot of videos.
Denver was the one that had security guards when I did a show out there because of this threat.
So you were here recently, and that was after this situation?
Right when it started. So within the first week that it started, I had a show in Denver. They were threatening the producer. They were threatening the comedians that they were going to come and fuck up the show. They were like, we're going to come and fuck things up if you keep Jocelyn Chia on the line. Like, that's how aggressive and these people are.
Wow.
They're really such horrible people.
Now, does that mean those were Malaysians who were threatening? I mean, I'm assuming...
all Malaysians.
What's that?
No other countries. All Malaysians threatening, yes.
Okay, so they were Malaysians who might be living in the United States who would threaten that, I'm assuming.
I think that even the Malaysians in Malaysia, I mean, it's all just words, right? They're just threatening to threaten. I mean, I don't think they would have actually done anything. They're like keyboard warriors.
One of my conservative guy friends, he doesn't understand all the woke talk. He's like, I don't get it, man. What's the difference between mansplaining and just explaining, huh? I'm just fucking explaining. I'm like, okay, mansplaining is when a guy's explaining to a woman, but he is ugly. You girls get it, huh? Yeah. When a guy's explaining something to me and he's ugly, I'm like, shut the fuck up. But if he is hot, I'm like, oh, I don't know anything.
Well, in watching your material, I feel like you dance around in a very clever, funny way between the left and the right. You kind of talk about woke, but then you attack it from an angle that, at least from my perspective, I didn't expect. Can you maybe share? Is that part of your persona? Is that part of your method to kind of not really tack to one side politically, but find the funny wherever it may be?
Well, that is the advice I was given by comedians and I wasn't a political comedian for a very long time. And this joke you're referring to was probably my second political joke, and I probably only have like 3 now, so it's not really very, very political. I'm not a political comic really. But when I did the one that you're referring to, comedians with the more seasoned comedians were advising me, if you want to go political, the key is you have to attack both sides, right? Mm-hmm. So then you're not just biased towards one side. So that is kind of how I approach it. You don't want to alienate half your audience.
Gotcha.
Although I did come up with a joke when I was in Atlantic City, which is pretty Republican, and it was killing it because it was a joke about Biden, and it was about how the Singapore minister had to come out and apologize for me. And in the joke, I just say Prime Minister, the Prime Minister to come out and apologize for me. That'll be like if Joe Biden apologized to Canada for a joke Dave Chappelle did about Canada. Can you imagine Joe Biden apologizing to Canada over a joke? No, right? Because Joe Biden can't form a sentence. So, the Republicans were fucking loving it. I wonder if this is funny enough, because even in America, we can make fun of our president, right? It's like a fun thing. And because Joe Biden has been known to have a speech impediment before, etc., I was like, maybe I could joke about this even in New York City, but no, not really. Come on, guys.
You don't want the new cancellation to start. I grew up I'm older than you. I grew up in the 80s at a time where, boy, the comedians just did almost anything. It was Andrew Dice Clay and Sam Kinison and Bobcat Goldthwait. And it feels like we're holding comedians to a different standard now, that if they say something that's legitimately offensive, but they're trying to make us laugh, that we get offended and that we get hurt and that we want them to stop. Why do you think that cultural shift happened? I mean, this is your business now. I was kind of curious. I know that there's a cultural component to your joke and your situation, but just generally speaking, we are more offended, more easily offended by comedians. I mean, they're not politicians. You're not making a statement that's going to impact legislation, but we get angry as if it is. So why do you think that changed?
Well, I think when something is such a cultural zeitgeist shift, it's going to bleed into every area, right? Like you can't have a society become so much more politically correct and sensitive without it bleeding over into the arts as well. I do wonder, however, if maybe say other artists like painters, sculptors, those kind of artists, like can they still be offensive in their art? Like, I don't wonder if it's really just comedians and we don't get the same kind of protection other artists get for like it's just art and art is supposed to be a reflection of reality. I mean, how much Holocaust art do we have? Or World War II tragedies are depicted in paintings and in fiction and in poetry. So why are comedians seemingly right now exempt from the freedom of artistic expression that other artists seem to be able to enjoy?
Yeah, it's a great question.
A bigger question that I'm not sure about, like why is it only comedians and not really authors or painters or sculptors or filmmakers? Like filmmakers depict the most tragic things, even if it's in a form of fiction. So you can't even say it's a documentary sometimes, yet they are allowed to do it. Like, is it something about making someone laugh that holds us to a high standard that makes no sense?
Yeah, but there's something that laughter really does take us. We let down our guard when we laugh, and I think maybe that's why we feel a little bit more vulnerable. But it's a great question. It is, and like you said, it is bleeding across the culture at large. So it's not a surprise that comedians are being impacted by it. You know, I know you suffered a little bit with TikTok. They may have taken your video in question down, and I've talked to a lot of different.
Also run by a Singaporean CEO, so like he may have had something to do with it.
Yeah, that's no accident then. But has that happened to you before, or have you heard from maybe fellow comedians who have struggled with big tech censorship? Because I've run into this a lot of comedians where some of their bits, and it isn't necessarily even an outrageous bit or even a political bit.
TikTok is so pussy. I mean, so pussy. In terms of taking stuff down, I guess it's pretty rare, but more like in terms of what they will let you even pay to promote. Like, oh, if there's like one cuss word, you can't promote it. Same with Instagram. So yeah, I would say these social media companies have been very timid in letting stuff through. They did, and again, I think it's because the Malaysians have been reporting as much of my content as they possibly can. I had this one joke over the pandemic where I was staying with my friend and I was saying, oh, you know, I been dating this guy. It's been 3 months, but we haven't had sex yet because I want to be good. I want to wait until I'm officially his girlfriend and he's officially 18. And then I really like using toys in the bedroom, and this is his toy, and I take out a Lego. Very funny. Existed on TikTok for a long time, but now the Malaysians reporting everything, TikTok did take it down as well. So I guess it depends on whether or not it gets reported. And I have noticed there was this one joke. I was doing crowd work with a couple of Indian doctors. They were a married Indian doctor. And I was like, oh, so what's it like when you two have sex? And I was just making fun of that. I was like, who's your cardiologist? Who's your or whatever I was saying. I can't remember exactly. And yeah, that got reported. And I think it was Instagram that wouldn't let me promote it from there. So it didn't get taken down, but I couldn't promote it because of the report. Oh, I remember now. I tried to do a promotion to promote the video, and then the promotion got stopped because it was reported as, oh, I don't know, sexual content or something. So yeah, I would say the social media platforms had pretty pussyfooting around comedy.
Yeah. They don't even recognize sarcasm sometimes, which is obviously a shame. You know, when I read your Newsweek column, it ended on such a wonderful note where you stood tall, you didn't apologize, and then it seemed like you gained support culturally, that people were rallying to your side. And I think that is a lesson when you can, if you do stand tall, if you do defend your artwork, that there will be people who like you, respect you, and maybe you empower someone else. Do you have any just final thoughts about that element of your story?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like there's still a lot of people who don't dare do so, right? People who are afraid of getting canceled themselves. I mean, the vast majority of comics supporting me have had to do so privately. Like, people don't want shit in their own backyard. So I would say it could definitely be a lot stronger. Like, the more artists stand up for one another against this kind of cancel culture, the better off we would be as a collective. But I think ultimately people do tend to be selfish and cover their own asses. So that's why the brave few who have spoken out, have taken a stand. I mean, the comedy clubs who are like, you're definitely not canceled here, not on my watch. Like really, I really have to like give credit to those because I understand how much it takes to stand up for someone being canceled because you think that they shouldn't be. But however, if more people could do that, I mean, even in Singapore, right, like when I say Singaporeans are criticizing me, and this club owner in Singapore was like, oh, you should still do a show here. You're gonna sell out. Singaporeans would flock to see you. I was like, really? I thought Singaporeans were all against me. And he says just the vocal minority, but the vocal minority is so strong that they silent the reasonable majority. I mean, I even had like some Malaysians try to support me on Twitter, and they got so slammed by fellow Malaysians, they deleted their accounts. Like that's how bad this kind of backlash censorship is. But you end up not fully knowing what's the real story behind it because it's the vocal minority. I'm not saying Malaysians are the minority, but like for the Singaporeans, for example, they might actually be in the minority, but based on what you're seeing on social media and in the biased news, you would think it was like a whole entire country against me.
Yeah.
But anyway, so the final note is like, I would hope that more people can stand up for other people. I mean, I think it's a thing that bleeds throughout society in general too. Like when people get bullied or attacked, harassed on the streets, nobody really stands up for them anymore. At least not in New York City.
Yeah, it's a terrible situation, and I think every time someone does it, though, someone does what you did, it's a cause for good. So, but Jocelyn, before I let you go, any plans for 2023 projects you're kind of flirting with right now, or anything besides hitting the road and making people laugh?
Yeah, the irony, Christian, is that I was considering quitting comedy as a profession. I mean, I would never stop doing it because it likes my soul and my heart, but I was considering quitting it as a profession because I was like, this doesn't really seem to be going anywhere. Everyone's so much more successful than I am. I've been in it for a while. It's not really popping. I've gone to the level that I was happy at. I wanted to be all the New York City comedy clubs. I'm pretty much there, really enjoying it. And I was like, I don't think it's going to make me much money. Let's find a second career. I was thinking of doing that. And then a couple people who I trust advised me, just give it one last push, like one last year. So I was like, all right, maybe I'll do it one last year. And then this happened. And now I can't quit because I don't want the Malaysians to think they won. I don't want to think it was they that made me quit. You know what I mean? Like if I quit now, they're going to think, haha, we got her to back down and she's no longer coming. I'm like, oh no, I can't do that. I have way too much pride to do that. So I'm going to have to keep going in comedy just to be like, no, you guys did not manage to cancel me. So I'm working on my first ever comedy special. Pretty excited. And interestingly enough, I actually was asked to do a special even before Malaysia Gate happened. And I turned it down because I felt like it would have not been a great special to have to tape it so quickly. I was like, I need a little bit more time. So I turned down the offer, even though the money was pretty good. But I think it was like my intuition telling me that there was going to be something more that you could talk about down the road. And now I do. Right now I have this like amazing story to tell. I've gotten some really hilarious bits out of it already that I'll probably share on YouTube, at least a portion of it. And yeah, so my first special will be coming out. It's in the works. And I think that'll be my make or break. I mean, it'll be if the special does well, I'll be like, all right, you know what? Then I'll keep going with comedy.
Gotcha. Well, listen, not only am I glad you stood up for yourself, I'm glad you laid the groundwork for others to do the same, because I do think that's important. And but Jocelyn, thank you for.
I really hope so. Yeah. I really hope more comics will stand up for themselves and their craft, and more comics stand up for other comics.
Absolutely. Well, I appreciate you joining the Hollywood in Toto podcast. Of course, check out Jocelyn when she comes to a comedy club near you, or just follow her on Instagram at Chia Comedy and on Twitter at Jocelyn Chia. Thank you so much.
If you want to know how to spell it, you can just Google comedian wanted by Interpol.
That's right. There you go. Well, I'm sorry this happened to you, but I'm glad there's been a pretty big silver lining. And best of luck, and don't quit comedy. You're very funny.
Oh, you're so kind. Thank you so much.
All right, that's it for this week's show. Thank you to Radio America for having me as part of their killer podcast lineup. And while I have your ear, I hope you'll drop by HollywoodInToto.com. I founded it in 2014. It's updated 7 days a week, and it gives you the skinny on what's woke and what's worth your hard-earned dollar. See you next time.